using AI kind of after you've done a lot of the hard work yourself can be helpful. I think that the challenge comes in when you're using it like earlier in the process.
Hello, welcome back to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. I'm Mary Stack, the Executive Director, and today we're diving straight in to examine AI, namely the large language models like ChatGPT and its ability to impact our brains, our cognitive function, and the development of critical thinking skills, especially in our kids. You'll be pleased to know that quite a few people, scientists, educators, and journalists, are discussing the results of a recent study that was conducted by MIT Media Lab using ChatGPT, which we'll get to in a moment. But first, let me introduce the esteemed panel, made up of a neuroscientist, ex-neuroscientist, she likes to call herself, a professor of humanities, and a high school student. Celia Ford is a science journalist based in California's Bay Area, where she currently covers AI policy at Transformer. She's written for Vox, Wired, and the Open Notebook. She has a bachelor's degree in cognitive neuroscience from Brown and a PhD in neuroscience from UC Berkeley. Carlo Rotella is a writer, journalist, and a scholar. He's professor of English, American Studies, and journalism at Boston College. Rotella writes regularly for the New York Times Magazine, and his work has appeared in The New Yorker, Harper's, and the Best American Essays. His latest book is What Can I Get Out of This? Teaching and Learning in a Classroom Full of Skeptics. Ashanti Rosario is a senior at Newtown High School in Queens, New York. She recently wrote an article for The Atlantic. It was entitled, I'm a High Schooler, AI is Demolishing My Education. She aspires to amplify the voices of the underrepresented communities in the media and uphold journalism's pledge to truth and public service. We certainly can use that, Shanti. She plans to pursue a bachelor's degree in creative writing and hopes to become a published author while freelancing in journalism. So welcome to everybody, Celia and Carlo and Ashanti. So first we're going to start with you, Celia. You're an ex-neuroscientist and a writer who studies technology and who knows about the brain. You wrote a piece for Vox entitled The Case for Using Your Brain, Even if AI Can Think for You. So what prompted this piece and what are your concerns about AI tools like ChatGPT?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. But yeah, I think the thing that first sparked this piece was way earlier this year. I think this might have been January, maybe even December. I came across a tweet or whatever we call posts on X these days, from someone who had just met with a recent Stanford undergrad, for an informational like job interview. And this person wrote that the students seemed to have trouble like completing sentences during their conversation to the extent that they were wondering whether the student might be sick or whether like something was happening with their family. So they asked, like, hey, is everything okay? Do you need to take a beat? And the student basically told them that they were struggling to make it through the conversation without ChatGPT because they were so used to relying on it in school. And this really freaked the poster out. And reading this, it really surprised me as well. And then I think in parallel, this reminded me about back when I was an undergrad studying cognitive science, I learned about this cognitive philosophy theory of the extended mind, which is really interesting. It's this idea that the mind doesn't just include your brain that's inside of your head, but your brain plus all of the tools that you use and all of the information that you have consistent access to. Um, and at the time that this theory was published in the 90s, some philosophers commented on it that, like, this seems kind of silly. Like, are you implying that you're always going to have access to your, like, notebook and your Rolodex? Like, that doesn't really seem like it's actually part of your brain. Um, but it seems like this has become more true over time as we have started to have things like smartphones, where it's like I do kind of have access to all of the information on Earth in my pocket all the time. Um, and so I couldn't really stop thinking about this and how extending our minds to include things like the large language models that power chatbots like ChatGPT might be changing our relationships to thinking. And then luckily I had editors that let me spend a really long time thinking about it.
So you must use some of those tools in your everyday life, but you noted that ChatGPT doesn't rot our brains, but it fundamentally changes how we interact with information. So explain both of those things, how you use it and what don't you let it do.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that yeah, I'm not like fundamentally opposed to using AI tools. And I use them sometimes. I think that like a lot of people, I find myself using AI almost accidentally every time I Google something now because Google has just made AI summaries like the default thing that shows up at the top of the search result. And frequently, I do find myself just reading the summary and not clicking on something, which makes me feel bad as a journalist because I'm like one of the people who's relying on people clicking on my things. But it's hard not to. And I'll also use, I mostly use Claude to do some like background research. Like sometimes if I'm in the brainstorming stages of something, or if I don't understand something technical, I might say like, "Hey, can you actually explain to me how diffusion imaging works at a high school level?" And it's usually pretty good at tasks like that. So I don't really have any qualms about using AI for kind of like information seeking purposes, assuming that you take these responses with a grain of salt, knowing that they sometimes are not correct. Um, what I don't use them for is like generating original ideas from scratch and copy pasting responses, which I can talk more about later. But I guess that's that part. That's what I use these tools for. And then I think as far as like I don't think that ChatGPT like rots our brains, but it changes the way that we consume and interact with information. The first part is that I just don't think that we have very much neuroscience data showing what ChatGPT or any AI is doing to our brains in any capacity. So I always push back on claims that AI is like neurologically doing something because we actually just don't know. Part of that is because it just hasn't been long enough. ChatGPT was just introduced to the public in like late 2022. And, like if there are any academic scientists watching this, they'll be very familiar with the sluggish pace of academic biology research. It's very normal for a human brain study to take at least 3 years, if not much longer than that, from start to publication. So it's not weird that we don't have any data on this. I think it will come. But right now we just don't really have the evidence to make claims like that. Um, that said, I do think that it's pretty intuitive that like interacting with AI changes the way that you think about stuff. Part of this is that when you use a chatbot versus reading a book or searching the internet, it changes you from being an active seeker of information to a passive curator and consumer. Um, so like especially compared to a couple of years ago, chatbots sound very smart. I'm frequently impressed by what ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini can do. And so it's tempting when they answer your questions to just believe them. And I think that searching the internet feels more like following your own train of thought. You're kind of hopping from link to link. It feels like something that you're doing inside of your own head. And there's actually psychology studies showing that um, using like Google search can kind of trick people into thinking that they know more than they actually do because they're so wrapped up in this feeling of like the Googling is me, like this is me thinking. But ch talking with chatbots feels very different from that. It doesn't feel like part of you. It feels like you're talking to an all-knowing oracle that is much smarter than you, telling you stuff. And so then your job shifts from finding the information yourself to just kind of reading and maybe curating the fully fleshed out answers that you're given. So it makes you much more passive.
Or maybe not even reading. I mean, obviously, devil's advocate response to that is if we don't know enough about this neurologically, why the hell have we unleashed this on the whole population of students? So
I mean,
that's
that's a great question I wish I had an answer to.
yeah. So
Unfortunately, don't work for OpenAI, so.
so we all know we get these cute little neat packaged answers from them, for everything. And as you say, it stops us being active and turns us into this passive person. But let's go to what research does exist. So the biggest
Mhm.
one, I guess, that people have been talking about was that MIT lab um, research. And there are links in the chat to the people that were talking about it. There was a New Yorker piece. Forbes had also done a piece on the decline of human cognition skills. Um, so tell us briefly what the MIT study showed.
Yeah, there are probably like at least 10 pieces in like major outlets about this piece. It went fairly viral over the summer. But yeah, so this study which was held at MIT was not, it hasn't yet been peer reviewed, but there's a very long, it's like 200 plus page preprint that's available online. Um, and it's pretty much the first study to present some brain data showing that using tools like ChatGPT maybe is changing neural activity, at least in the short term. Which, yeah, like is a huge deal. Even though it hasn't been peer reviewed, it's one of the only studies like this that exists so far. So yeah, it's very long. They did a lot of analyses, but I'll try to hit some of the highlights. Um, the basic idea is that these researchers were monitoring brain activity using electroencephalography or EEG. This is basically sticking electrodes onto your scalp, and then those electrodes measure electrical activity that comes from brain cells as they fire, and it's kind of recording that activity as it passes through the skull. So it's a very crude measurement of brain activity. Like you can't say what individual cells are doing. You can't even necessarily say what a specific like part of the brain is doing. Um, but it gives you a general idea of like, is the brain active or not? How, like, in what direction does information seem to be traveling and at what time, which is still useful. So they were having participants wear these EEG caps while they wrote short essays using either ChatGPT,
So
using
there's three
traditional.
groups. Let's
There's three
differentiate.
groups.
Three very
Yeah,
just
yeah.
different groups.
There's three groups. One of these groups was basically given essay prompts and told like you can use ChatGPT as much as you want. A second group was said that they were allowed to use the internet, like they could use a traditional, like not AI enabled Google search to help them. And then a third group had no access to any of that, and they just had to use their brains and write it themselves. Um, so by tracking these electrical signals as they're traveling across brain regions, these researchers found that there's brain waves corresponding to cognitive functions like concentration, and like working memory, which is your ability to kind of hold things in mind, which is very important for kind of like synthesizing and gathering your thoughts as you're writing, and creativity were all weaker in the group that was using ChatGPT versus other volunteers. Um, Sorry, my cat just knocked something over behind me. They also found that ChatGPT users seem to be processing information differently than people that were working with their brains alone. So the brain-only group seemed like they were mostly processing bottom up, which means that their brain signals were mostly traveling from regions that are storing memories and sensory information up to the frontal cortex, which is where critical thinking occurs. They're basically taking like things that they already knew and had experienced and then processing them. But the ChatGPT users seem to be doing it the other way around. The
Well,
information seemed to be going from the front to the back. Um,
also, not to get into too much into the nitty gritty, what the profound thing was from what I can gather was, first of all, the people that weren't using anything were using the most of their brains, and the people that had best recall were the people that wrote the thing themselves. The people that had least recall about what they wrote were people using ChatGPT. They couldn't remember what they wrote.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, yeah, so I guess I bogged myself down a bit in the
Yeah,
neuroscience
just
nerd details, but I think, yeah, behaviorally, important finding is that the people that were using ChatGPT basically could not quote their own writing, which I think is a fairly intuitive finding. Like anybody who's copy and pasted something from ChatGPT could tell you that they probably don't know what it said. And if you wrote an essay yourself, you probably do have some idea of what that essay contained. So that's important. I do think that one neuroscience finding that I do think was really important is that after basically like 3 sessions of these users coming back, writing an essay, getting it analyzed, some of the people that had been using ChatGPT the whole time were then asked to write a fourth essay just using their brains. And in that session, their brain related or their like memory related brain waves were weaker than in people who started off writing without AI and then gained access to ChatGPT at the end, which I think is really important when we're thinking about education, because it looked like using AI actually boosted performance in people who had already done the hard work of learning themselves first. But when it was used as a kind of copy paste
GPT.
replacement for doing the work, then people really struggled at the end.
So one suspects then that we all know that AI is making our brains lazier because we don't seem to be actively engaged. People are copying and pasting without even reading what they're copying and pasting, which many people have started calling outsourcing of the brain. So there's deeper issues there about AI is actually screening the information that it feeds to you, and we don't even know the sources for that. So that's a deeper, more sinister question. But there also seems to be a homogeneity to the end product, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So large language models, which are the kind of algorithms that are powering all of these chatbots, they're basically trained on the entire internet. So they've been fed gazillions of like books and YouTube videos and Reddit threads, like everything. So when you talk to them, they're responding by trying to predict the best, most likely answer, given the words that you typed, the context and the order in which those words appear, and often your personal history of chatting with that bot. So what happens is that their responses tend to converge towards the consensus, like the average of everything that anyone's ever said about that thing that's available on the internet. And sometimes that's a good thing. Like if you're on ChatGPT and you're saying like, hey, these are the things in my house and I really need to unclog a toilet. What should I do? Like ChatGPT will probably give you a pretty good response to that because it has like every person who's ever tried to unclog a toilet's response on Reddit and they can probably help you. Um, but if you're trying to like write a book, then the average safe response probably won't make your book very interesting.
Also, we will come to this later in the program, but it does tend to sort of gravitate us towards mediocrity with that kind of idea in the creative realm. You're not going to get a lot of original thought with that kind of search going on. Okay, there are other people like Harvard. Some studies showed some people more productive as workers, less motivated. Carnegie Mellon. Outsourcing thoughts on AI leaves people's mind atrophied, which can result in deterioration of cognitive faculties. Okay. The only person that doesn't seem to have much to say about it is Sam Altman about this study.
Yeah, Sam Altman, he really has had nothing to say about any of these specific studies. Um, And in fact, just today, Sam Altman published a blog post titled Abundant Intelligence, where he basically wrote, we want to create a factory that can produce a gigawatt of new AI infrastructure every week. And NVIDIA just invested $100 billion in OpenAI, where they intend to build a bunch of new huge data centers as part of the Stargate project. So it's super clear that these companies have absolutely no intention of slowing down. They're actually very actively ramping up.
And later, we hope to do a program about the energy use that these data centers are actually costing us, which is another whole matter. Okay, let's move over to Carlo, who teaches humanities at BC. Some would say you're probably already under siege in explaining the value of your field and the importance of reading, developing critical thinking skills, forming opinions to humanities students. So, what do you think is being lost with the insertion of technology into the classroom? And do you think your students think shortcuts are always best?
Well, I don't know how under siege we really are, to tell you the truth. The people who always know what you should do in college on YouTube have been telling people to pick a major that has the same name as a job, which is terrible advice. It usually doesn't work. I mean, occasionally it works that way for like a journalist or an engineer, but it almost always doesn't work that way. And, now that people who majored in finance and coding are finding out that you can't time the entry level labor market 2, 3, 4 years out, especially because of the uneven entry of AI into different industries, especially at the entry level, right? Um, Now those same people who know exactly what you should do in college are saying, well, maybe you should get a well-rounded liberal arts education, right? So it's sort of like wearing straight jeans. It's like sometimes you're in fashion, sometimes you're out of fashion, sometimes you're ahead of the curve, sometimes you're behind the curve, but you just sort of wear straight leg jeans and it works out fine, right? So I'm not so concerned about being under siege. I don't think that part really matters. There used to be more English majors. There's still plenty of English majors, and the major's not that important anyway. That's not
But
the,
but you wrote a book really talking about the importance of why should I be doing this? That was
yeah.
what your book.
So, I mean,
So
what you
who
do
are
in an
these
English class,
skeptics?
what you
Who are
do in
the
an English
skeptics?
class is practice extracting meaning from the world, right? And then expressing that in some kind of an argument. That's basic equipment for living for any citizen, any worker, any human being, right? So, in that sense, we go around doing this all the time. And uh, in an English class, you practice on novels and poems and short stories and movies and so on, but you're practicing a basic skill that you need for everything, that you need for understanding the State of the Union address or understanding like the state of your neighbor's yard. You're perceiving form, you're making arguments for meaning, right? And the thing is, it's not so much whether AI can do this well or badly, or it's not really about AI at all in a lot of ways. It's a labor saving device in the humanities, and the labor is the entire point of an English class. Basically, reading is thinking, writing is thinking. All the work is in the effort that an English class is not designed. The point of an English class is not to like produce okay English papers, right? That's not the point. And in fact, when we used to print out papers, what did you do with them at the end of the semester? What did everybody do? They threw them away, right? The papers are basically kind of the spent shells, and the point is the thinking that went into them, right? So if that's the point, if the point is to do the thinking of reading and writing, and what's any labor saving you do is saving you from getting the work done. I mean, the way I think about it is sort of we've had machines for hundreds of years that can move more weight than people and that are faster than people. But if you want to get stronger and faster, you need to move the weight yourself and you need to run the distance yourself, right? So especially for 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20, 21-year-olds, the whole point is to do the work, right? So using it to brainstorm or using it to draft and all that is just taking away from yourself the chance to do the work that you're paying in many cases obscene amounts of money to do, and you're also practicing to be replaceable by it instead of practicing to have some critical faculties that you can bring not only to the work you do, but also to your encounter with the increasing volume of AI generated stuff coming at you that you need to exert your critical faculties on.
Very interesting point. Very interesting point. So my concern, of course, would be what happens in 10 years when someone like this Stanford grad that's just come out and can't put a sentence together, this person comes into your class and they've gone through, as the Shanti's going to tell us, all their writing classes and everything else by doing a quick search on Moby Dick, do a précis, bing, 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 bing. It goes from one machine to another machine and it doesn't pass through the cerebral cortex at all of the student. what is that person going to college for, and what are they going to do when they get to college?
Well, what are you going to college for is sort of that's the underlying thing that is brought to the surface by this conversation that doesn't have much to do with AI, which is, the real enemy here is a sort of transactional view of education, right? That how can you get the highest grades, and students touchingly believe the best earnings, with the least amount of work, and that's really the enemy. And a lot of what I do as a teacher these days, because I don't believe in empty threats, right? I can't say use AI and you get an F because I can't prove it. That's not the point at all. What I need to do is win students over to thinking, right? I'm going to work on my chops. I'm going to work on my skills, right? The production of an okay paper using AI is a waste of my time and a waste of my family's money or the institution's money if it's paying, right? So I think that's where the battle is actually won, is to say, like, look, if you take this class, we're going to expect some things from you, and outsourcing your work to your robot servant slash overlord is essentially like joining the track team and then doing your laps on an electric scooter, right? You did go around the track, but you didn't get any faster or stronger. Nothing happened, right? And that's not an impossible argument to make, right? And the other thing is, you can design courses. They're not AI proof, obviously, but they can be AI resistant. You can have pen and paper midterms. Some of my colleagues are now doing writing in class, paper writing in class too. I make participation in class a big part of the grade. Require everyone to speak at every class meeting. Now, to come to your point, and the other thing you can do, right, is not just assign papers, but teach the whole process of writing. So first turn in like a sketch of some ideas, then turn in a very rough draft, and a less rough draft, and so that we see the process the whole way. So there's things you can do to make it AI resistant. Now, to come to your point, the problem's going to be that imaginary student you're talking about. In the near future, if they have AI pendant or AI glasses and invisible earpieces, the question is, if they're sitting in your class, are they getting in their ear tips for what to say and how to say it? You can instruct it, okay, I want you to listen to what happens in this class, and I need talking points, right? And, that's not science fiction. That's pretty much possible now. So if you really, truly just rely on it for everything, it'll be hard to get through class or a date or anything, hang out with your friends, without having your Svengali, sort of just saying, here, this would be a good point to talk about this, or, on a day like, here, talk about your feelings. That's what the average of what everybody says to do is to do that, right? So that to me is actually the greater problem. Is it going to erode the face-to-face classroom in which my classroom, there's no devices, so it's just us talking. Is there going to be such a thing as just us talking?
Okay, so we've started thinking about what actually we are about in education. What is the purpose beyond getting the A's? And then I think part of the next point here to look at is how it challenges our being human, the things that we love about being human, the work element, the satisfaction, the joy, the productivity, the relationships we build, as you just alluded. The one-to-one is what people come to college for, right? Otherwise, we could do it all on computer. I mean, we're paying a lot of money to sit in your class, right?
They're paying for the admissions policy that produce the other students and the hiring and promotion policy that produce the teacher. That's it. They can do everything else at home in their underwear, right? So that's pretty much it. They're paying for something that will never happen again in anyone's life in the room, which is 75 minutes. We've all read the same thing. We're undistracted by other tasks, and we're trying to just extract the meaning out of that one thing that we've all read. That won't ever happen again. Well, it certainly won't happen at a meeting at work, at anybody's job, right? Because everybody's distracted all the time. That's even true in, English department meetings, right? So this is really this incredibly unique experience that's getting more unique all the time. That it's getting to be this rarer and rarer and more precious thing. And one of the things that I have to do with students is say, listen, we spent 2,000 minutes together this semester, and those 2,000 minutes are the main event. And we have all been trained, and Ashanti can no doubt confirm, we've all been trained that what really matters is the deliverables, right? Papers, the tests, right? So what you do have to ask for a switch in mentality to say, actually, what really matters is the 2,000 minutes we spend together doing this thing that you can't do any other way. And then, yes, we will have papers, and yes, we will have tests, but this is the main event. This is the thing you're paying for. And who knows? I have no idea what the future looks like. But at the moment, my sense of it is that people are pretty relieved to be in that situation and to be in a deviceless room and to just talk to other humans. And that, at least so far, it's like, well, that's my 75 minutes where I talk to other humans, is a pretty compelling reason to to try doing it my way.
Well, I'm sure you've got one fan already in the room because Ashanti Rosario, who's the senior at Newtown High, wrote this piece in The Atlantic, which we've got the link to, expressing her disgust at how AI was demolishing her education. Great piece, Ashanti. You made some really fascinating points from the perspective of the high schooler who's part of this national experiment. What are your chief observations and objections about AI in your classroom, other than the obvious one, which was cheating?
That's a good question. Well, most of my observations relate to work that requires analysis or creativity or discussion. So that's usually in humanities courses like English and history. So often in English classes that are held in my school, we're made to analyze how and why authors use certain literary elements, or devices to depict a character or a theme or a scene and how it improves the delivery, how it drives impact. And I think that these assignments that require this independent thought and that perspective, that extensive digging into these passages, being very present, are the areas where students are really turning to AI. And my objections to this, aside from the cheating, would be the loss of raw and original thought and perspective. It's true that everyone's minds work differently. We see, we feel, and we hear things differently. I don't think that any one person can deliver a speech or a poem or really a thought in an identical way to the last. I think that's what brightens a classroom, and it's what really makes discussion, and it's why we're all present. It's why we're not remote. And I think that by using AI, you're kind of negating, as Carlos said, the reason why we're in a classroom, the reason why we're physically there. So that would be my take on it. Yeah.
So you also echo some of the things Carlos said there about the one-on-one. And you said your experience had been that ChatGPT had resulted in lack of camaraderie that used to have working on these late night papers together, less interaction, no self-discipline, because you can get away with not meeting deadlines yourself. And then one of your biggest upsets was your debating, which you really love, is now kind of being killed by using AI. So tell us how that happened.
Well, it's hard to find a specific moment where I noticed because I feel like it's so hidden. I think that it was the subtle change in argument, originality. The words changed, but I feel like the core of arguments were very similar, and it was something that we didn't pick up on in the beginning, but it started to become more prevalent later on, especially when we started noticing people like between rounds, instead of being very locked in conversation, how are we going to deliver this, what should we use, what should we cut out, what didn't work before. Now it's very, your head is in the computer. And I took a leave of absence from debate for a while, and one of my friends was still on the team, and she told me that that pattern that we were noticing has continued into blatantly using AI in between rounds. And that because they were using AI, which my team really tried to stay away from, it made it harder to compete because they had went into competitions already knowing that the team had used AI, which was seen as like foolproof in the eyes of the people who were like judging. And so it shifted the energy that people had going into the room and really felt like they were being set up for failure in that space. There was no longer that thinking on thinking quick on your feet and being really engaged in an argument. It was just, okay, well, you're debating a computer at this point. So I feel like that's what really was a decision, and why I chose not to return is because I felt like, again, that really negates the point of being in the room and being one on one. It's all about that being present and not passive. And I feel like now we've lost that. So what's the point of, standing my ground?
Nobody could say, let's ban phones. No?
They tried that, but people
Didn't
find their
work?
ways, I've noticed.
Really?
Yes.
Too bad. That's too bad. So I'm just going to quote from your article here because it was quite strong. One of your points. The trouble with chatbots is not just that they allow students to get away with cheating or that they remove a sense of urgency from academia. The technology has led students to focus on external results at the expense of internal growth. The dominant worldview seems to be, why worry about actually learning anything when you can get an A for outsourcing your thinking to a machine? So I'm opening this up to everyone now. Can anyone think of a way of safeguarding against this? Celia, we can do you, and then maybe Carlo can weigh in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to hear what Carlo thinks as someone who is a professor, because my instinct is that you would have to kind of change the incentive structure, because I think it's extremely rational for a student who is overcommitted and has other stuff going on besides classes. Like you're probably like if you're in college, you've got extracurriculars, maybe you're dating. Like if the only thing that matters is getting an A and there's a really fast, easy way to get an A, and that's like not the thing that you care the most about, then of course that's what you're gonna do. But I think that if the yeah, like if there's a way to kind of shift the incentive structure to hammer in, like the thing that matters is spending this time in this room together, like this is a valuable thing for you to do. Um, I think that doing something like that versus placing some onus on like individuals or like AI developers makes sense to me, but I'm curious to hear what Carlo thinks.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, you can get to AI resistant, not AI proof, right? But so, for instance, if you make if you require everyone to participate in class and you make that a big part of the grade, one third or one half of the grade, that's one way to do it. Another is to have the midterm and the final, in pen and paper, and have them exclusively aimed at the reading and what happened in class, right? So you're changing the incentive structure to be, were you paying attention in class when this happened, right? Then there can be papers too, a couple papers, and a couple things to do with the papers. One is again to see it at multiple stages, so that if it weirdly takes a jump to suddenly tasting like incredibly processed food at some point, you'll know, right? And the other one, which I'm doing this semester for the first time, is after you turn in the paper and after I mark it and put a grade on it, but before I give it back, we do a one-on-one interview, just 10 or 15 minutes, in which we talk about how your reading of the text or you're watching the movie, whatever it was, led to the argument for the paper. And you get a separate grade on that. So that way, if you turn in a humanly imperfect paper, but follow the rules, do it right, and then you'll do quite well on the conversation. Whereas if you outsourced the paper writing, you probably won't do that well on the conversation because it'll be hard for you to explain how the paper was generated by your reading of the text. So there's things you can do, but I think the main thing you can do is you are building a community in a classroom, and you need to move the mores of the community over a little bit from what's the easiest way to get an A. So it's some combination of that's not the easiest way to get an A if you've structured the midterm and the final and all that differently, and also why is that what you're doing with your $100,000 a year that you're spending on a fancy college, right? Why are you practicing to be irrelevant in the transaction between two different machines, right? So far, okay, but it's not foolproof, and it is a much more it's about winning over people one by one, which is not the way college went. When I was in college, my professors lectured at me while smoking. And now it's much more like who's in the room, where are you coming from, what is it you want to accomplish, how's it going, how come your paper did this weird thing halfway through where it started not sounding like you, right? And it's just a much more intimate and a much more personal thing than it used to be. It's also more work.
A lot more work. Yeah, a lot more work. So none of us have addressed this issue head on, but it's a huge one, which is we're all quite easily talking about, oh, well, the cheating, and even Celia gave us a very rational explanation of how you extract the A, in a rational sense. Nobody really talked about the ethics involved here. So one of the things that was raised by Howard Gardner this week when he was talking about AI could radically change schools by 2050. And he said, although there were 5 states of mind or intelligences that could be replacing perhaps 3 with AI, respectful and ethical matters cannot be consigned to a machine. So here we have an area that nobody's really talked about. And I think because cheating is happening so rampantly and insidiously now in this country, it's just the norm that we default to. There doesn't seem to be a consequence for it. So why would you even develop a sense of ethic about what was right or proper or good or true or honest? So Ashanti, let me ask you first. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would have to agree. I think that something that really is raised to question is ethics. And I think that by using AI, you're taking that away from why you're doing the work that you do. I feel like people who, like Celia mentioned, actively seek information, I feel like because that's taken away when you use AI, you're losing that emotional drive to do the work that you're doing. And so I feel like um that's something that really is brought into question, that loss of like emotion and ethic. And I feel like that should be addressed more.
I, I, I'm not so focused on cheating. I'm actually much more bothered by convenience and the path of least resistance. Out and out cheating, just dumping the prompt into in ChatGPT and turning in the results is pretty rare and pretty easy to see. I'm more actually, in many ways, I think I'm more concerned about people using AI to do the reading than I am to do the writing, because you are missing 100% of what makes a novel meaningful when you reduce it to like a podcast or like bullet points. So it's not so much cheating. It's just it's a path of least resistance. It's a labor saving device, and it's hard to get people to do labor, right? It's hard. It's like saying we're going to use the stairs in this class, but there is an elevator, but we're going to use the stairs. But that's only if you think of the class as the production of papers is the point of the class, right? My thing is it's a workshop, right? It's not a factory. It's a workshop. So being in class should feel like being in a band. It should feel like being on a team. It should feel like everybody's working on their individual chops and we're doing this thing together, right? That's actually, I think, the best defense rather than like coming up with a brilliant app that allows you to count keystrokes and catch people you cheating, which I think that's sort of a sideshow to what we're talking about, which is just like, hell, that's a 19th century novel. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I think I'll turn it into a podcast, which is really, it's not so much cheating as just a progressive inability to do the work.
Yeah, it wasn't so much the counting of the strokes and, I've got you, as much as developing your own sense of morality.
Well,
I
I
want
think
to do the best
craft is
that I can do.
morality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so here's a quote. Harvard also did a very good piece a couple of months ago where they asked various academics from different disciplines what were some of the AI dilemmas they were confronting. And they gave very different and interesting answers. But the guy that's head of the Carr Center for Human Rights said, I worry 50 years from now, we'll only have people who've learned on these devices. It will be harder and harder to motivate people to get an education in order to live up to ideas of human excellence. I thought that was a beautiful comment. The idea of pursuing excellence for its own sake. So that was an interesting point. Somebody else who's a philosopher and director of ethics said, we need to go back to basics, oriented around what is conducive to human flourishing. Maybe we're better off writing our own emails, so long as we can retain the elements that are core to ordinary human interactions. So I think these people that are in different fields are raising really interesting points. Again, what is the purpose? Why are we here? And I think you've done a very clever thing, Carlo, because you've almost taken a kind of athletic metaphor to get these people to kind of do the stuff. Because, you never have a football coach saying, well, I want you to do 6 hours training or over the weekend. And there was an app for it that, obviated you need to go around the track or do the weightlifting or whatever it was. So I think you're appealing to that part of people of pulling together. This is why we're doing this. It's, the greater good. We're getting something fine out of it at the end. So, we got a load of questions and we've only got, we got 15 minutes left before we proceed with me saying anything more. Okay. I don't know how some of these could be answered. They're big. How do we preserve the point of the work while also introducing students to co-thinking responsibly with these new intelligences? Beyond school, will students need to be able to think for themselves and use the AI with intention and purpose? That's a great question. Anybody want to try and answer it?
I can try, although I can't promise. That's a very big question that I certainly don't have concrete answers to. But I guess to like continue with the sports athleticism metaphors, the way that I think about like do I start using AI tools or like is that going to better prepare me for the job market or is it going to like hinder my cognitive development? Like I think that we've gotten into a bit of a pickle because kind of like how in the world of bodybuilding, like you could not use steroids. You will lose if you choose to do that. And I think that especially in in like the knowledge sector for people at universities that are going to be seeking like white collar type jobs when they graduate, a lot of companies kind of are putting demands on their employees, expecting that those employees are going to be augmenting their performance with AI. So if you choose not to use these tools, you'll probably find that the demands are like outpacing your brain's ability to keep up. And I have extremely mixed feelings about this because I think that if I was a purist, like, no, no one should ever use AI tools, it will be horrible for you. Um, like I don't get much value out of writing LinkedIn posts. Like it doesn't spark joy. And I think that a lot of people on LinkedIn will like AI generate LinkedIn posts because we live in a strange world where like having clout on social media websites is important for your professional development. And like, I don't think I necessarily fault people or place like tons of moral weight on someone's decision to like be a part of the system that they're trapped in. Um, and I guess I don't really have an answer to this, but it's part of the dilemma where I think that choosing to abstain from these tools does kind of it risks placing you at a professional disadvantage in a way that I find tricky to come up with a solution for. So sorry, that was like really just introducing more problems and not answering
Oh,
anything.
no, I
But,
think
but those are my
true.
thoughts.
Well,
I,
I agree with that. I mean, I think in your education, somebody should show you how to use it, and somebody should make you do your own work, right? And so I can't do that first thing. I can do the second thing, right? So I'm, it's an amazing technical advance, and there's all kinds of ways to use it, and that's fine. But somebody should make you do your own work, and I can cover that part. I am in no sense absolutely for or against. I have no idea how this is going to come out or how important it's going to be. I will say anecdotally, my students who get jobs, and then their employers tell them you have to use AI to do the job, say it's incredibly crappy, but it goes faster. So they're just sort of, it's a way to do a lot of mediocre work quickly, which if that sparks joy, but at least it leads to a paycheck at the moment, right?
right, right. What are your thoughts, Ashanti? You got anything to say on this?
I don't think so, but I would have to agree with Celia. It is hard to get out of a system that you're trapped in. And I've noticed, even if students abstain from using AI, there are teachers that use it and they don't say it up front. So if you write a paper and it's completely and authentically yourself, but a teacher uses AI to grade it, then AI might not think that it meets the requirements of a rubric. So you're fighting against a system that you have no voice in. It's very hard to get out of. So yeah, I would have to agree with Celia. It's incredibly hard when you're subject to it and you're not the one controlling it.
I guess I'll add that the way that I think about it is that like the results from this MIT study showed, like if you've done the work of like you've been taught how to think for yourself, like you did all of that, you read the books, you did the discussions, if you then use a tool like Notebook LM, for example, which is a tool that basically lets you upload a bunch of things that you've read or written yourself, and then you can like consult with those sources versus like manually paging through a bunch of things. That can actually be like a quite useful tool. Like I've used Notebook LM to help keep track of like my citations when I'm doing a big feature. Um, and I think that using AI kind of after you've done a lot of the hard work yourself can be helpful. I think that the challenge comes in when you're using it like earlier in the process.
Well, I think this is the point that one of the last points that Ashanti made in her essay. She said, AI is producing a generation unable to think or perform for themselves. It seems that nobody requested AI intervention in learning. And I think these tools are great for things like protein folding and targeting drug discoveries and all that. But I think we should ask ourselves, what is a chat box doing in our children's education, smaller children? And why do we want to give away this wonderful time, this learning process, with joy and discovery and an understanding of people, which I think you can't shortcut that. That's something you develop with time. So I just have to play the devil's advocate here and say, one has to wonder when you just told me about Sam Altman's plans to keep on building, keep on, make it bigger, bigger, bigger with all these data centers. What is the end game here? What are we going to end up with?
I
What
mean,
is the population going to look like?
I don't know. I mean, I can tell you that what Sam Altman wants is like super intelligence that can do everything. And I think that the CEOs of all of these companies, like the CEO of Google DeepMind, the CEO of Anthropic, like genuinely believe that if we can achieve a like superhuman artificial general intelligence that will like be capable of all of the things that humans are capable of, it will lead to like abundance forever. Like I think that the thing that people sometimes fail to appreciate maybe is that these CEOs I think genuinely believe these things are true. Um, I don't agree with them, but I think that that's what their goal is. And I think that these companies have now kind of trapped themselves in an arms race where if any of them stops, then someone else will keep going. And so I think that the question of like, well, why are they still doing it? It's very similar to like nuclear proliferation. And I think that it's a very complicated like geopolitical question at this point.
Yeah, we haven't got time to even approach any of the
Yeah.
other aspects of AI, which are actually all been written about this last 2 weeks. Some very interesting and disturbing articles. But I think the question for people like Ashanti, who's at the first stages of how this has already impacted her education, she's given up debate, which is such a shame. I mean, even trivia. I don't know if any of you play trivia. I mean, that used to be real fun. And I've stopped doing it because I'm tired of people, one person sits on the phone getting all the answers. I mean, the whole point was you conferred and it was a great deal of, it was a little kind of competitive buzz. That's all gone. So if small things, small joys like debating or doing trivia are going, what other things are we going to lose? Why not have a novelist, produce a novel that was like a combination of Jane Austen and, I don't know, someone contemporary, Kurt Vonnegut, put them together and write a screenplay. I mean, why bother with the human element at all?
Well,
Nobody's got the answer
I
to
mean,
that. I don't.
The two things are not connected, I think, really, honestly. It's like, well, we have machines now that can play the drums faster and more regularly than human beings can, right? So if you're old enough to remember when drum machines came in, it was like, well, no one's ever going to play the drums again because now we have drum machines, right? So it turned out to be wrong for two reasons. First, people are better at it because they're irregular in interesting ways. And second of all, it turns out that you need to be a pretty good drummer in order to get the most out of a drum machine, right? So look around. Lots of people play the drums, right? Even though a robot can play faster and more regularly than you can. I mean, the idea that you can program something to write a novel has nothing to do with the desire to write a novel, right? The production of novels is not the point. It's sort of living in the world, imposing meaning on the world, extracting meaning from the world, using, embodied competence, using yourself to do something is the point. And I don't know, my experience of students is, so far at least, they get that, and it's more pleasurable and more satisfying to use yourself to make the work. And I agree with Celia that you have to change the reward structure so that you can reward what also feels better, which is to use yourself up so that you can go home, sleep, and wake up and make more.
Great points you made, all of you, in different ways. I applaud you doing what you're doing, Carlo. I like it. I like the way you're pitching it. It's working. And I hope, Ashanti, if you get into Princeton, you'll have instructors like Carlo to keep you fired up. And Celia, keep writing about what all this is doing to us. So I know it's hard to believe. We've only got like 3 minutes left. I want to thank Celia Ford, Carlo Rotella, and Ashanti Rosario for giving of their time and knowledge in this discussion, which we really only scratched the surface of. So thank you everyone for joining me today, because this is my last forum as moderator and executive director. I want to thank all of you for taking part today and throughout the past 10 years. It's just been wonderful and a unique honor to share this space with so many great minds. So thank you, everybody, and good night, and I guess good luck.